everyone. I'm Jessica Hornstein. Welcome to the No Not Crazy podcast, where we explore the invalidating messages we internalize, their effects on our lives, and the ways we can free ourselves from them. We've all had those experiences that make us question ourselves and even sometimes feel a little crazy. Let's stop accepting the idea that there is something inherently wrong with us and begin to appreciate that actually there is something fundamentally right. So join me, and together we can all feel a little less crazy. Welcome, everybody. Today on the No Not Crazy podcast, we have a big and important topic to discuss. So we are here today with Sybil Cummin. Sybil is a licensed professional counselor and approved clinical supervisor specializing in working with survivors of domestic violence and narcissistic abuse, including the youngest witnesses. She specializes even further by focusing her work with survivors who are experiencing abuse post-separation and abuse in our family court system. She created the Rising Beyond community and the Rising Beyond podcast to offer hope and strategies for healing from abusive relationships and offers training for other mental health professionals on working with this population. Welcome, Sybil. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you for having me and kind of allowing me to share my knowledge and passion with a wider audience.
Yeah, it's such a, it's not an easy topic to grapple with, but it's really necessary. I think that we talk about it.
I was going to say it's a topic that really, out of any kind of crimes or any of these types of things, is still really secretive and taboo to really discuss. But the numbers and the rates of it are so astronomical that it's happening so much more than people want to believe.
Yes, I'm sure. So yeah, before we get into the heart of it, maybe you could, give us a definition of domestic abuse or domestic violence, because I think it might be helpful for us to understand as we enter into this conversation, really what we're talking about, what those, what the parameters are.
Yeah, absolutely. It is important because people have a true misconception of what domestic abuse and domestic violence looks like. Very often it is solely thought of as kind of physical abuse within an intimate relationship. And that is just a tiny piece of what domestic abuse, some people call it intimate partner violence. Some people use the term narcissistic abuse. Most of it is kind of interchangeable, but really what we're talking about, and so as we're talking today, it is a systematic and willful pattern of power and control from one intimate partner to another. And so it is really that process of one intimate partner doing all the things that they can do to have power and control over their other partner within the relationship. So that could be physical abuse and threatening physical action. It could be sexual abuse. It also could be elements of coercion, coercive control. And so those things include, the verbal and emotional abuse. Financial and economic abuse is actually the most common across all domestic violence cases. It can, incorporate using children. It can incorporate all the things we talk about of that gaslighting and making you doubt your reality, these psychological abuses. And so it incorporates so many things, not just the physical aspect of abuse. And the one that I didn't mention that is always like the last one mentioned is spiritual abuse as well. So using spirituality, scripture to abuse in certain ways is also a piece of what we're talking about domestic abuse.
Wow. Yeah, I think I'm so glad you said that, because I don't think people necessarily think of all those things. And it is really important to understand, because people might be in a situation, right, where they don't recognize what's going on as abusive, right?
Yeah. And that
Yeah.
term, it's interesting. It's like a newer term, or like the cool kids term, of narcissistic abuse. That term really is for people who don't subscribe to the term domestic violence because of those misconceptions.
Mm.
And so when they look at narcissistic abuse, they're looking at those other elements of coercive control that they're experiencing, because they may not be experiencing physical abuse at all. There may be zero physical threats. And so that term has really kind of felt true for more people. It is a form of domestic violence. And if that term fits what you believe about yourself and about your situation better, then I'm going to meet you where you're at and use that term also.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so many of us have experienced in relationships having a partner invalidate our
Mm-hmm.
experience, our reality, and, try to talk us out of how we feel about what we're experiencing. And, other people around us may do the same. Our family and friends, may be well-meaning, but we'll say things, right? Like, oh, he's not that bad, right? Or,
Yeah.
you should just be grateful that you have a roof over your head, or, what,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'm sure you have a lot of examples of that. And then we end up also talking ourselves out of it, right? We do that number on ourselves where, that am I crazy thing.
Yeah.
And, we know something isn't right, or we're not happy. Um, but we think either, that's our fault, or we're talking or trying to talk ourselves out of how we feel, or that we should behave differently, and then we can change the situation. And, you know, a lot of the time, not that we shouldn't take personal responsibility for things, but in these kinds of situations, that really is not what it's about, right? And so
Yeah.
obviously, domestic abuse is like the very extreme example on the spectrum of these kinds of toxic relationships or something like that. So
Absolutely.
yeah, if you could maybe speak a little bit to that, and really how that plays out in different aspects of these situations.
Yeah, it is absolutely a very extreme example. And even just in the definition, kind of some of the important pieces of that is that it's a systematic process. It doesn't
Mm.
just like one day things are abusive. They actually have been since the very beginning, since your first interaction with that person. And the other piece that is, it's hard to stomach. It's like the majority of people in the world want to give people the benefit of the doubt. In these cases where it is, power and control, it is willful. So it's done fairly knowingly. Like there
Mm.
is a purpose, and I am doing this on purpose in order to have this control over you. So that's gross. But one of the main kind of tactics in their arsenal is that kind of gaslighting, minimizing, excuses. And they will start with that and give, for whatever bad behavior they might have, they may first say like, gosh, I am so sorry. And they'll feign remorse. And like, it has just been the roughest day. And because we are going to give people the benefit of the doubt in general, we're like, gosh, yeah, you did have just such a hard day at work. And we excuse
Mhm.
and we excuse and we minimize. And it's like, wow, I should have noticed he had a hard day at work. I probably shouldn't have brought that up right then. And that continues. And so in these relationships, we're conditioned
Mhm.
over time to look at ourselves, look to change ourselves. We stop even noticing our intuition. We just start to ignore it. And then we start to have this internalized gaslighting of, if only I were a better wife, if I was better in the bedroom, if I was XYZ, I'm a better parent, if our children were quieter, if I knew how to handle them, then this behavior from my partner wouldn't happen. And so that happens throughout the relationship, and it happens after a lot of times too. And so I work with a lot of, I do work with men because men experience abuse as well in relationships. The community I run is specifically for women. And so when we, after they've left and we're dealing post separation, and this is a whole nother podcast, but our family court system allows, or actually not allows, it supports abuse to continue post separation. Mm-hmm. And so you have to have contact with your partner. So the gaslighting gets to continue. Right. The gaslighting happens within the court system, right? Just this idea that a high conflict divorce, which I just did the air quotes around high conflict, because that is domestic abuse.
Right.
90+% of high conflict divorce is domestic abuse, but the court systems believe it is both parties. Mm-hmm. Both parties are at fault here. And all the professionals around you will be looking to you as like, what is your, like, this is your fault too. Like even just the phrase of like, well, you married him.
Yeah. Yeah.
You married him.
Yeah.
Is gaslighting all in and of itself, and that victim blaming. But even as I'm working within my community, there's this idea that my situation isn't as bad as. So I don't deserve your support, or I'm taking up too much space because I don't share children with my ex, so I don't have to worry about abuse of them later, or I wasn't physically harmed and you were physically harmed. I don't deserve. Mine wasn't as bad. And so that conditioning that we've had within the relationship, and maybe even as kids, right, as children, like we sometimes learn that our don't cry, cry. Mm-hmm. We've learned over time. And so it's just that constant conditioning to where we will also then gaslight ourselves as during that healing process after we've left. Yes. So yeah, gaslighting is throughout the entire process of domestic abuse as you're healing, from the people around you because they don't understand. Family and friends will say things like, I just can't believe it. He's always been so nice. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so then it's like, oh, and there's an embarrassment to that. And so yeah, it's just that like systemic process conditioning. Yes. That keeps us stuck in that.
Yes. Yes. To your point, I mean, the fact is that a lot of the times, I think we learned in our childhood what we have a right to expect in a relationship. Mm-hmm. Right. And a lot of the time, for a lot of us, that was not a whole hell of a lot. You don't deserve this or that or whatever. And you should just be grateful that, you're being fed or, whatever it is. But, to have hopes sort of beyond that is selfish or something. And then when we pick a partner who is going to reflect that. And then when we're with that partner, right, we can't see that, that's not okay. Right. It'll be harder to have a sense of that. And then, of course, the cycle continues, right? Because the children, assuming there's children from that relationship, right? Well, then what are those children learning? Mm-hmm. Those children are then learning this is what a relationship looks like, right? Yeah. And they don't have a right to expect, that they shouldn't expect a loving, safe, secure relationship that, embraces the whole of who they are and all of that. Yeah. So it just keeps perpetuating, I would imagine.
Yeah. And it's, the victim parent very often, like while you're in it, you are just focused, even if you're not consciously focused on safety, your nervous system doesn't give you a choice. A lot of times you're just going to focus on safety. What's going to keep myself and my children safer today? My children behaving perfectly will keep us safer. Mm-hmm. And so whatever I need to do to have them not bicker, not cry, do what I'm asking, do what their partner's asking, that in and of itself can kind of condition our kids to have, start to, not notice or prevents them from kind of emotional intelligence, like building that
Right.
emotional intelligence. And then kids, because they're brilliant and their nervous systems work just like ours do, they will learn very often to like their fawning response. It's like the fourth trauma response, which is like appeasement.
Yes.
They will learn that keeps them safe. And we're not always, again, when I talk about safety, it's all encompassing, not just physical safety,
Right.
but
Emotional. Yeah.
emotional safety. So if they are people pleasing and stroking the ego of the abusive parent, then, and they're seeing, and their nervous system is like, oh, wow, you're safer. You're safer. Do this always, do this always, do this always. They will then learn this is how I stay safe in relationships, and they will always do it. And so that, you know, a lot of people pleasing comes from that fawning trauma response is I am
Right.
emotionally safer or even physically safer when I do this. So that again perpetuates, because there is an ideal target for someone who has narcissistic or abusive traits, and people pleasing is one of them.
Yeah. So it's sort of both. It's children are learning it, first of all, from watching their parents interact and the toxicity of that, and that being the role model for a relationship. And they're also learning it because of the sort of the demands that it's making on their behavior and their responses to the situation. Yeah. So it's coming at them.
They're learning. Yes, they're learning it from all over. And they're learning, right, that emotions shouldn't be talked about. You shouldn't show your emotions because for many reasons, right? If I'm crying, my parent gets angry. So I'm not going to cry. And they'll say it's not that bad. Or they'll, you know, say like, you're not sad. You know, those things. And that doesn't just happen in abusive relationships, right? That happens with busy
all
parents.
The time. Yeah.
Right. Like, oh, I don't have time for this, you know, this breakdown right now because we're running late.
Right. Yes.
How do we respond to that? Right.
Absolutely.
And shoot, I'm a mama. And do I respond 100% awesome all the time? No, because I'm human.
Right.
And so, you know, it's like not beating yourself up all the time, but really focusing on the repair if you need to repair.
Yes. Yeah. Also, it seems that, I mean, yeah, you're denying, they're being asked to deny their feelings. You're not sad and this and that, but it is also a case of, you know, being asked to deny your reality, right? The children, like in families where it's not talked about. And again, as you say, it doesn't even have to be as extreme as domestic abuse, but when something's going on and nobody's talking about it and it's the elephant in the room and it's obvious and the kids know everything. You know, I was a teacher for many, many years and I am a parent. And you know, they know everything. They know what's going on. But if nobody's talking to them about it, they may not know what it's about or how to characterize it and where to put it in its place. And is it about them or not? You know, they don't get a chance to sort of have a real sense of reality. Right.
Yeah. And if, you know, there's like they are sometimes overtly told not to talk about it. Or if child protection is called, it's like, you don't talk to that caseworker. You don't tell them about this. Or there's that, you know, covert threats or the covert rewards for not talking about it. And so they've, you know, they're conditioned to keep it a secret.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when you keep things secret, you don't have a place to process what's gone on. You can find yourself being like, gosh, did that really happen? Did I make that up? Did I exaggerate that? My parent is really cool sometimes. Like they take me to Disneyland or they buy me these things. Are they really as horrible as I thought, you know, as I thought they were?
Right.
And so just the act of secrecy or that idea of secrecy also kind of adds to that gaslighting because they don't have a place to process what they've experienced.
Yeah. And they also, I mean, without that place to process what they've experienced, they can't heal, right? That the opportunity to heal from it as they go on in life, right? Until you can sort of tap into that experience, you can't start to heal from it.
Yeah.
So it sets them up for the, ongoing challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what's really unfortunate and tricky is that sometimes when they are vulnerable enough to share the secret, like the family secret, nothing happened. They're sharing to get it to stop. They're sharing because they can't live this way, right? They've been told like these are your safe people.
Mm-hmm.
And then nothing happens. And so then they're in trouble for sharing the family secret. And then they weren't protected. And so then they've learned, I will never share. I can't trust anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they don't.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think when children have a sense that their parents have stayed together for their benefit, their, quote unquote benefit, I think that's such a burden for them to carry.
Yeah.
First of all, the parent who's the victim, right? So they may feel like they need to caretake that person. I'm sure there's a lot of responses kids have to that parent. But also, just sort of knowing, if you come to a realization that your parents stayed together in the name of your well-being, which really just made you suffer, but also they suffered, your parents suffered,
Mm-hmm.
that to me, that seems like such an incredible burden for children to carry.
Yeah. Because kids, depending on age, right, they
Mm-hmm.
don't understand divorce. They don't understand separation. They don't understand like the falling in and out of love. They don't have that life experience yet enough to understand, or the abstract thought. And, so sometimes the comments from younger kids are like, Mom, why did you make dad so mad?
Mm.
Right. Which then is heartbreaking and horrible for that parent, right? The victim parent. But then there is like a time when, kind of like that late elementary age where kids that I see in my office, I'm a child therapist as well, and they will be like, gosh, I just wish my parents would get a divorce.
Mm-hmm.
I just wish my parents would get a divorce because they can't stand the constant arguing, the screaming, the witnessing of abuse, the feel of the house.
Yes.
Like they just want it to be over. And there is this still, which, this was stronger, when I was first starting in the field in the early 2000s, but there's still this idea of like the broken home. And, we're supposed to be like mom, dad, 2.4 kids, cat, dog, white picket fence, like happy family. But the way I see a broken home is that needs aren't being met.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't matter if you're together or apart, but if the child's needs aren't being met, that's a broken home.
Right.
And so if their safety isn't being met, their psychological safety isn't being met, their emotional intelligence, that learning isn't being met.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter if you're together or apart, it's a broken home.
Right.
For these kids.
Right.
And there's there's so many barriers to leaving, which kids aren't going to understand till they are much older.
Mm-hmm.
So it's this balance, but if kids, like you're their safe person. And so if there's a threat to your survival and safety, that is the scariest thing for our kids.
Mm-hmm.
Like that is scarier for them than their own safety. And so because you meet their needs, like you're the person. Right. And so they will carry some of that burden. Some of our kids really want to protect that parent and will then hate themselves because they couldn't, because can a 6-year-old stand up to a big adult man who's hitting their mama? No. Mm-hmm. Like they're 6. Can a 12-year-old stop financial abuse? No. Nope.
Right.
but
Right.
they'll try and take on that role a lot of
Right.
times.
Right.
And then there's also a lot of kids who feel extreme anger because the victim parent isn't protecting, isn't leaving, isn't taking the kids out of the situation. There's not like, oh, well, my child only goes this way. It's ebbs and flows, and they'll shift based on development and what they understand and their experience.
Yeah. And I think so many of the effects, right, aren't evident until probably a lot later on in life too.
Yeah. When they have the
as they get
language.
older. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Back to what you said about a broken home. I mean, that tension of just, and even if it, if it's not physical abuse, but even if, emotionally, right, everybody's walking on eggshells, and there's just no warm, none of that home, the kind of home you want children to be living in, where there's warmth and caring and consideration and joy in each other's presence.
Yeah.
That may seem so under the radar, but I think it is so damaging. It's so hard for them.
Yeah. It affects how our kids attach, and what their attachments look like. And our attachments in early childhood really do have an effect on our longer term relationships. It doesn't have to just be romantic relationships. That's where I spend my time working, but in all relationships. And so it's really important to look at how does our home feel?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. If I'm nervous and anxious all the time and hypervigilant, and my nervous system is going crazy and I get headaches and stomach aches, and your kids probably do too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So staying together for the sake of the children, it's not the best default.
No.
There are times we understand where, leaving is a challenge for various reasons, but all other things being equal, sort of that motto of staying together, I'm doing it for the kids, is a false belief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
While we're on the topic of children, I'm curious, because when you were talking about how people, the things that people may use against their partner, financial and this and that, and you mentioned children, that they may use the children. I'm curious if you can sort of elaborate on that and give us more of an understanding of, how do people use the children to control their partner?
Yeah, there's a huge range of this. On the very extreme range, they will threaten to harm the kids. Mm-hmm. And sometimes they do, right? If they are physically abusive and it no longer has the results it wants, the perpetrator wants when they're abusing you, they'll move to your kids.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that usually, even just the threat of that, has the exact result that they want. You will behave, again, air quotes, how you need to, so that your children aren't harmed. So that's on the very extreme end of it. But it varies. The threat of, I will take your children, or you're so crazy, no judge is going to give you your kids. So if you leave me, I'll get the kids.
Right. And turn them against you. And
yep. And so there's those elements. There is like that in that financial abuse piece, like there's, if you do leave, are they going to pay child support? Hit or miss there, like no, a lot of times, because they want to continue to financial abuse that way. They will counter parent. So say there's something, your family has lived vegan for as long as your kids are alive, and that's so important to you, and that seemed to be important to them too, but that was just sort of a way to hook you and make you feel like they're your soulmate and whatnot. And then you separate and they introduce meat into your child's meals. So things like that, they're not going to back up your discipline or what you think is important. So there's that way. There is a term, and there's an inaccurate term that's out there. It's parental alienation. That term is actually a legal defense versus a real thing. What it really is domestic violence by proxy. And so domestic violence by proxy is abuse through a third party. So they'll use your child to at first is kind of like that middleman, and then they'll use it as like, being like the Disneyland dad and being super fun, and they'll be like, yeah, mom's not fun, or they'll promise a trip somewhere, but it was actually on mom's weekend. And so they'll be like, oh gosh, your mom just doesn't want you to have fun. Or they'll plan, a sporting, like, oh, you've always want to play baseball. And like, yeah, mom, I want to play baseball. But all the practices are on mom's time and mom can't do it, or mom can't afford it. And they're like, oh, your mom just isn't going to support your dreams, buddy. So those kind of smaller, insidious things that will come into play there as well. So there's a lot of ways for them to kind of use the children to continue that harm. But yeah, the term, and this is a whole nother podcast episode,
right.
But parental alienation versus domestic violence by proxy. Domestic violence by proxy, there you can see patterns of it throughout, throughout the child's life, throughout the relationship. Whereas the term parental alienation pops up, it's like, oh wow, I filed for a divorce and all of a sudden I'm alienating.
I see.
And so but there's, oh my gosh, it's like a whole discussion, and everyone is very polarized about this. But if you look at patterns, that's kind of what the important thing to look at. Like, are there patterns of this throughout, or is it kind of like this just happened?
Yeah. And to me, I mean, this really gets me because, a parent who's willing to put their kids in the middle of something is just, that's a whole other level of how it's like you want to hurt somebody else more than you love your kids, like,
yep.
I'm not a perfect parent for sure, but I can't imagine not putting my love for them and my care for their well-being ahead, like that. I just want to hurt somebody so much that
I wouldn't, they will get harmed in the process,
right.
And I don't actually care. They're a tool in my arsenal. Like, that's what my children are.
Yeah, it's terrible. You also had mentioned that you largely, that your group is for women, but that men do experience this as well. And I'm wondering if there are differences in the types of abuse that women typically experience and men typically experience. If you could share that with us a little bit.
Yeah. And it is a gender-based violence to some extent. Like, the numbers are pretty clear. However, what people still, again, are looking at is like more of that physical violence. There is a higher lethality with a male perpetrator to a female target. There's just physically, it is scarier. Again, the risk of lethality is extremely high, so much higher that way. But what it looks like, the elements of coercive control are very similar when there is a male victim and a female perpetrator of. And then it looks even a little bit different when in LGBTQA family or families or couples. There are some differences with that as well, but really any way that they can have power and control over their partner. So it could be racking up extreme amounts of debt, and then it's your partner's job to fix that because it's all in their name. Using kids, women, if you share children, women will use children against men, which is what makes like the family court system so tricky and muddy to figure things out. A lot of times they will do that gaslighting, right? Like, you don't remember it. That didn't happen. That's your perspective. Those kinds of things. No one will believe you. Like, more rarely, like, it's not common, but a female perpetrator of might threaten or might harm themselves and blame it on their partner. People think it's like a lot more common than that is, but it has happened. And so, yeah, it's like any way they can isolate you, because that's pretty common within a female abuser, is
Right.
isolation is pretty strong. They'll make it so that you have no support. You just don't have
Mm-hmm.
anywhere to go, and nobody will believe you. Even if there is physical abuse from a female to a male, no one's going to believe you. And
Right.
wow, you're not even a man. You can't take a hit from a girl, right? There's like those elements at play
Yeah.
too when there is physical abuse.
Mm-hmm. I would imagine there's enough stigma as it is when it's a female victim. I would imagine for a male victim, I mean, whether it's physical or emotional abuse, anything, it's much harder for them to acknowledge and come forward
Yeah.
with that. Yeah.
Yeah. And for people even to name it. I know when I've had male clients and I'm working with them and they did not come to see me due to, they never use the term like domestic abuse or domestic violence at all. And as they're talking, I'm like, well, that's actually domestic abuse or domestic violence. They're like, no, like, I'm not scared of her. And I'm like, let's look at different forms of being scared. You may not be physically scared at all. Are you scared for your children? Are you scared for your career? Are you scared for, your financial, like well-being? Like, are there other ways of being fearful?
Yes.
But they're like, no, that's not right. That's not it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that speaks to how do people begin to identify, if you're in a situation, I mean, I'm trying to think of sort of how this journey goes.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously the first part is really identifying that you're in this situation.
Yeah.
Right. And then after that, then there's all the decisions to be made about what's to be done about it, which I know is complicated. But going back to what we were saying at the beginning, you're talking
Mm-hmm.
yourself out of it all. And so what would you have people ask themselves? I mean, if they're listening, they're in a situation and they're like, I don't know, is this okay? Is this not okay? I feel I'm not happy, or I feel like something's wrong, but I just don't know if,
Mm-hmm.
like what kind of questions can they ask themselves to sort of get to the bottom of that? I mean, I know, we
Right. There's
can't
like
advise everybody on here, but as a
there's lots
starting
of
place
thoughts.
of to help people sort of assess what they should be thinking about.
I think if you are asking yourself if you are crazy, am I the crazy one here? That's a huge warning sign, a huge red flag, because abusive people don't ask that of themselves, because what they're doing is okay in their world. That's okay. That's how they work in their world. So if you, are like, gosh, am I an abuser? Or am I crazy? That's kind of your like red flag warning sign in the moment. I think really focusing on like, do I feel fearful of saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing? Am I ever scared for my kids? Right? Am I parenting my kids to protect them from this person?
Right.
So those are some questions to ask yourself in that moment. And then kind of as you get a little further along, really starting to identify, it's called cognitive dissonance. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's when you have two really opposing thoughts or your behaviors don't match your value system. So like I love him, I fear him. That's a pretty big red flag, but it could be like, I would never let someone talk to me this way. I stay in this relationship and I allow this to happen. I am successful in all these areas and am confident in all these areas. I will not speak my mind at home.
Right.
Kind of those types of things. Or if family and friends have said, and initially it's like, no, I haven't, you've changed or whatever. But if they're worried about you, or they've been like, gosh, you used to be so like bubbly and alive, and you just are a ghost, or you're vacant, or you're, whatever that is. And then the other piece, if you feel really alone,
Mm.
So you have family, you had friends, and you have no contact with them or very little, or your partner would get angry if you had contact with them. Those are really big warning signs that you are in an abusive relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And if
Yeah.
you Google search, like, is this narcissistic abuse or anything like that? It is. Like it probably
Mm-hmm.
is. So if you find yourself Google searching, that's like the hugest red flag, because you
Right,
already
right,
know.
right. Deep down, you know. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard because part of what happens in these situations, right, is that your sense of self gets so eroded,
Yes.
right? And your self-doubt is huge because you have somebody basically, as you say, systemically telling you in one way or another, whether it's overtly or covertly, that you're not worthy, you're not
Mm-hmm.
valuable, you're not lovable, you're not acceptable, you're crazy, you're imagining things, all these things, right? So it's
Yeah.
it's so hard to get from that place to have the awareness that you can, feel confident in, like, no, this is what's going on and this is not okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah. And I think the reason why there's a couple of reasons, but one of the main reasons the majority of survivors I work with are women, or are women with children, is because they weren't enough to maybe leave, right? The abuse of them, they didn't feel worthy enough to leave. When it shifts to affecting their children are worth it enough to figure this
mm-hmm.
out. And so I think that is why I work with so many survivors with children with their partners, because that element of, oh my gosh, this is happening to my children too, and I will do anything for my babies. So that's when a lot of people start to kick it into high gear, realize it, like that this is abuse, and that they may not, again, have felt worthy enough to leave just for them, but they may consider it if their children are being
They know it's
abused.
yeah, or it's affecting them in some
Mm-hmm.
really negative way. Yeah, that's a very good point. Thank you for making that. So how can we support somebody in a situation if we have a friend, family member, whomever, that we're pretty clear that they're not in a healthy situation? It's very hard to, until somebody, right, comes to a realization themselves and acknowledgement themselves of their situation. It can be really hard to talk to people about what
Mm-hmm.
we see
Yeah.
and to be supportive in ways that are supportive rather than make them feel criticized or shamed or things like that. So what suggestions do you have of what we, as outsiders to a situation
Mm-hmm.
like that, like what is most helpful to say or not to say, and what is most helpful to do or not to do? And maybe there's there is a differentiation between whether the person in the situation is aware that they're in the situation or not. And I'd imagine there'd be different answers for both of those. So
Yeah.
if you can touch on those, that would be great.
Yeah. I think the number one thing to remember is that it's not anyone else's job to kind of take on or replicate the role of power and control in the situation. When we see someone hurting, we want to help fix it. But the thing that's taken from them that they need to get back is autonomy.
Mm.
And so we should not take away their autonomy. So forcing someone, really pushing them to leave faster than they are ready for, or having like conditional love ourselves, like, I can't spend time with you anymore if you're going to stay with him. Like, you then are not a safe person, because on average, it takes someone 7 attempts to leave an abusive relationship successfully. And
Wow.
so patience is a really big deal. If you don't understand completely, because some of these stories are like Netflix worthy. Like you're like, what? Like who would do that? Like that is crazy. And it might not sound believable, but give them the benefit of the doubt of this did happen, so that they don't have to defend themselves because they don't have the energy to do that. And then again, that makes you feel like a not safe person. So kind of believing, and it's okay to say, wow, I don't really understand, but I want to. I think a question to ask is not like, are you okay? Because what are they going to say? Yeah, I'm fine. I'm just really tired or whatever. Right. The question is, or the statement might be, I've seen some things that make me really worried for you. Do you feel safe? And that question can be asked more than once, because at first that might be the scariest question that they have heard because they've never shared the secret. And so they might be like, yeah, we're just in a rough patch right now, but we'll get through it. And maybe a couple weeks later, you ask something similar, like how are things going? I noticed these changes. Do you feel safe, or is there anything you need? And then having resources kind of at the ready, because I think that prevents a lot of women from leaving successfully, is they don't have the energy to be online, or it may not be safe for them to be online searching for domestic violence resources. Right? Like, is their email being monitored? Probably. Is their phone being monitored? Yes. So, kind of finding, like, if you can get the resources for them, great. If you can help them with that, and kind of some of those logistical things, like if they're going to go file for an order of protection, who's going to pick up the kids from school? Right? So offering those tangible resources of like, hey, if you ever need to take care of business for this, I am happy to watch your kids for a couple hours. I'm happy to drive you. Like those really tangible things. Because when we are in, a true kind of crisis and nervous system crisis, we need more support for basic functioning.
Right. You're so overwhelmed and flooded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so if you can help take some of that off their plate, that is one of the most beneficial things you can do. And then just listening, just being present. And then also to protect you, you've got to really be aware of your boundaries, because you might be hearing horrible things. They may have told you horrible things and went back. And you're like, oh, like, I wish they would just leave. Like, I love them so much. I wish they would leave. It's hard for me to hear this. And so it's okay to say, wow, this sounds really hard. I'm not in a place right now, like a safe place to listen. Like there's people around me, or I want to give you kind of the space that you need. Can we touch base at this time? Right. And setting boundaries for you too, so that you don't burn out, because that person needs you. So making sure you're taking care of you, if you're helping in this realm, is important too.
And when you say it takes somebody on average 7 times to leave, because you're just saying the example of you hear these terrible things and then they go back. Is that what you're talking about? Are you talking about like they will physically leave, like remove themselves from the situation and then return?
Yes.
Is that what counts as leaving?
Yep.
On average 7 times before.
Or they'll have all their stuff packed and they'll be getting ready to go, and they've made their decision, like, I'm leaving. Partner comes home. Either there was like a really scary threat for them to stay, or it's called hoovering, which is a gross word. I think I don't like it, but where they'll draw them back in, like, no, like, do you remember? And they'll paint the picture of what could be.
Right.
And the person will say, okay. And they'll stay.
Right.
Just stay for one more night and you'll see. And so, but there is like plan to leave. Some people have filed and go back. Some people have filed for orders of protection and go back. And so it's good to know that, like, if you're supporting, because it seems crazy. Like it does. It's like, what? Like they're not safe. But a victim actually and this sounds so backwards, a victim knows how to stay safe, right? They're still here. And so very often the way that their nervous system is kind of now set up or conditioned is their partner comes home, they throw the mail on the table a certain way. And their nervous system is like beep, beep, boop, boop, like a computer. And now they know how to act tonight so that no one's harmed.
Right, right.
So then all of a sudden they leave and they have no indication of where their partner's mindset is at, where even physically, where is my partner? And so their nervous system is like, unsafe, unsafe. You need to know these things. You need to know these things to stay safe. So sometimes they'll go back because they feel safer if they can know where their partner's head is at that day. So that sound right. It's like, if you're on the outside and you're like, what? That's so crazy. They got the order of protection. Why would they allow him to break it? Very often it is because their nervous system is like, you are not safe. You are not safe. You need to know where they are. Because that's how they've maintained safety for the last however many years.
Right. Or your kids too. Mm-hmm. Like, and I think a lot of people feel this in any divorce, even when the partner isn't abusive, you know, that feeling that first time where your kids go off with their other parent and you are like not there maybe for the first time to kind of really be monitoring, you know, and again, not even when they're dangerous, just, you know, you have things you want done a certain way or whatever it is. It's at the scary moment.
Yes, you're no longer the buffer.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're no longer able to make that, you know, decision of like, tonight is movie night with popcorn to keep the kids quiet. Tonight to keep everyone safe.
Yeah.
You don't have that.
And you're not controlling also the spin. You know, you're not there to sort of try to make sure they're not saying something about you or whatever that is.
Yeah. So yeah, it's like just being kind of allowing them to find their own way with some support, sticking around, not questioning, like, don't say, I can't believe that. He's always been so nice to me.
Right.
Nope. Why didn't you tell me? Or why didn't you leave sooner? You know, if I was hit the first time I was hit, I would leave. Right. Those statements are pretty judgy.
Yeah.
And they will then deem you not safe. Like you're not a safe person. And so then you won't get to, right. And nobody says that with malintent. It's really because you can't believe it and you're mad and you care about your person, but they will deem you as not safe.
Sure. No, that makes sense.
Your support is gone. So,
and you know, and I mean, you can tell me what you think about this, but I think so many times when people don't leave relationships, you know, when you have an abandonment wound yourself, you know, when that's part of your makeup and your attachment history and all of that, even if you're the one doing the leaving, you feel abandoned. Like there can be that sense like that you're being left in a way. And I feel like that sometimes plays into the challenges people face with leaving really toxic relationships.
There's so much grief around it. And the part that it's devastating. It's so devastating when we're, you know, working with survivors is the whole thing was a scam. Like you fell in love with someone who is not real. They're not even a real person. And the dreams that you had that were painted for you were never real. They were never going to happen. And so that piece can feel like that real betrayal and abandonment because you were so vulnerable with this person who was not real and who used all that against you. And so it is so harmful.
Yeah. And it's just letting go of that hope, right? Like, you know, but you as you say, I mean, what you're grieving is the dream. You know, you're not grieving the reality. You're grieving the losses in that dream, letting go of that dream. If you separate that from what the reality is and you see the reality isn't a loss.
Yeah.
You know, to walk away from that.
So many of my people are like, well, I don't miss him at all. but I miss like this idea. But yeah, they don't typically miss the partner, like the actual person.
Yeah, you wanted to have this happy family and you wanted all these things. And yeah. So, well, this has been so helpful. So thank you for everything you shared. One last question. Where can people find you? And also, where can people find help if they're in a crisis situation?
Yeah. So I'll speak to the crisis situation because I think it is really important. If you're a support person, there is an organization called domesticshelters.org. And so you can just Google search that. And the reason I always share their information is because they are kind of like the hub. So no matter what state you live in, they have some international resources as well. They can get you to the right place. So you don't have to search, your state, your county, your this. You can go there and they've done the work for you.
Okay, great.
They have all of the, crisis lines available. They have all the advocacy agencies available. They have lots of information and safety planning. And like, it's just a really good hub of information. So that's domesticshelters.org.
Okay.
It's a really amazing resource. And then to get in touch with me, my community, and that company is called Rising Beyond Power and Control. And so we have a membership community where survivors come and connect, and we do some support groups and kind of like strategy coaching for post-separation abuse, communicating with your partner, because you still get to parent with them to some extent if you have children. And then we do like a lot of court strategy, family court strategy in that community. Lots of resources there. And the website for that is www.risingbeyondpc.com. And then if you want to listen to me blab on about different things, about all things kind of healing from these relationships, I have the Rising Beyond podcast that I started for this community and this population. It's very specific to this topic.
Well, I could listen to you blab on all day, but I'll have to go to the podcast to do that. We have to go now. But thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. And thanks everybody for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening and being part of the conversation. Please find a way to validate yourself today. Maybe find a way to validate someone else too. And if you enjoyed the show, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also join me at No Not Crazy on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Let's build this community of validation together.